Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, could this be indicative of how some gearing might be handled in the future of the game? Because we've got something very interesting on the gearing front. In the most recent build of the PTR, the PvP community has had a big shakeup in how gear actually works. And when I look at the new system that has been added for PvP, I see hints of what could be a future for the normal gearing in PvE in World of Warcraft. Or, well, maybe more realistically, just be a bit of a compromise. And also, do stick around for the end of the video. I'm going to bolt on a bit of news onto this. There's been an update on legendary items in 7.2 that I think is pretty good news for most of us. So, what's actually happening with PvP gear? Well, it's going to have an interaction with the Obliterum Forge. In case you're not aware, gearing from PvP currently is a very strange thing indeed. Doing battlegrounds and arenas and just, all that PvP content will give you gear randomly at the end. There's no way to target a specific slot or bit of gear or anything like that. And part of Blizzard's reasoning there is that because everyone uses a stat template anyway, it doesn't really matter. And you're not really chasing down specific bits of gear or anything like that. Now, of course, many PvP players want to do other bits of content outside of PvP, so this gearing system led to some frustration. Well, in patch 7.2, they're introducing a system where you can put your PvP gear that you don't want into the Obliterum Forge. It will then be broken down into what lead PvP designer Brian Holinka refers to as an echoes item, so basically some kind of currency. This can then be taken to a vendor, and you can use that to purchase a gear token for a specific slot. Using that token will then give you a random bit of gear for that slot, capable of warforging and all that stuff that you're used to. What's interesting here is that these echoes are, they're certainly a premium currency. They only come from melting, sort of some pretty hard-earned PvP gear from the Forge. Therefore, all of the PvP gear has some sort of value here. You can really boil it all down into a form of currency, meaning that it is not that dissimilar to how the older PvP currencies worked, or indeed some of the other currencies in the game. While I think this is a great change overall for PvP and a good improvement from where we are currently, I think there might be still a bit of pushback from players about the whole, slots and RNG thing, but it did have me thinking about how this forge, the Obliterum Forge, could be used in PvE, and do bear in mind we all get it for free in patch 7.2. One thing that I find interesting is gear essentially being a kind of currency. The idea of being able to do something useful with gear drops that are not an upgrade for your character directly is quite interesting. Currently, what happens when you get a bit of gear that you don't like? You either vendor it or you disenchant it. Now, it's fine, it's okay that you lose every once in a while, but neither of those feel particularly great. Why? Well, you put a bunch of time into getting an item, and that time doesn't really amount to anything at all, bar a few hundred gold. Now, in addition to this, the gameplay loop just ends there. You failed to get the bit of gear, so go try again. Well, with a system like this, with gear being able to, be turned into a currency through the Obliterum Forge, you could either win a little bit and get some currency, or you could win a lot and get a nice shiny item. There really isn't any losing there or wasted time, which I think is one of the weaker points of the current system. So I think that's all quite true for the PvP system that they've talked about, you're not really wasting that much time with it. When we talk about the PvE one, I think your opinion is extremely important here. It's, in my view, rather clear that Blizzard are a bit unsure about what gearing should be like in some other elements of the game, based on how they have been flip-flopping kind of a little bit with 7.2, and you'll see when I talk about the news later on in this video as well. That means that I think we should all try to chip in with our own thoughts and opinions whenever we can, or whether we disagree on little small things, that's really not that important. How would something like this actually work in-game? Of course, it couldn't really be a mirror of the PvP system. People would just go perhaps mad, just kind of farming up gear so they can melt it down to continuously try to, say, roll the best trinket in the game from the token. Plus, gear is far more important in PvE than it is in PvP, based on the current system, so the balancing of, a system like that would really have to be spot on for the gear acquisition. So overall, for me, there are a few different ways of doing it. I think the main way of doing it is the interaction with the Warforged system. Currently, gear, as you know, will randomly have a chance of increasing its item level when it drops. Now, I would have it so that players could essentially upgrade their own gear to a certain point past its base item level using some sort of currency that they would get through the Obliterum Forge and gear that they don't need. So let's imagine that you could upgrade your gear by 15 item levels from its base. So if you had the perfect trinket drop, but at a low item level, no worries, you can Warforge that, you can still have that be a useful part of your character's progression. Now, one very important distinction here is you would not be able to upgrade gear any more than that. So if a bit of gear dropped and was, say, Titan Forged 20 levels past its base item level out of the gate, you wouldn't be able to do shit with it. It would, it would already have been upgraded. The idea here is that it kind of maintains Blizzard's goal of having this rare chance of, extreme luck or, whatever they think is a good idea. It still allows that to be an exciting rarity. However, for the more common cases, this would give the player more control, I think, and most importantly of all, it would give you more consistent progression that you can actually chip away at. I don't think this would be too disruptive overall to the balancing of the game past maybe the first few weeks where, yeah, sure, some of the really hardcore people would grind it out a lot, but realistically speaking, I don't think we can design a game that is fun for 99% of people and also be perfectly balanced for the top 1%. I suppose what I like about this way of doing things is that it helps the Titan Forge system be a little bit of a bonus on top of regular gearing without being something that maybe feels dominant to some players. Now, I don't experience this myself because I don't care about gear that much for the most part. But there definitely is that perception that if something isn't Titan Forge, that's kind of like you've lost, even though it might actually still be, pretty, like a pretty nice upgrade for you. Now, there is a concern about, the overall item level floor being increased with this. I think that could kind of be balanced around. Plus, I think it does, the power gap there does pale in comparison to, say, people just chain running a lot of content, fishing for legendaries and massive upgrades and, chugging their way through dozens and dozens of keystones. So really what I've just mentioned there is how I think I would implement a system like this if I were to implement an Obliterum Forge based solution to some of the Legion gearing. Another way to do that, of course, is a vendor that sells gear tokens similar to the PvP system. But I think there are some issues there. It could devalue content progression if best in slot gear could come from that vendor. Therefore, doing it via vendor means there has to be a cap on how useful that gear can be, both in terms of, say, trinket effects and how exciting they could be, and then also just the overall item level. I do think something like this might be actually a pretty good way for players to fill in holes in their gear set. It could be a good form of catch-up gear that, unlike most catch-up gear systems, does involve doing more of the core PvE content, such as dungeons and raids. Still, though, I do prefer the first system that I mentioned, as I think it's got more long-term applicability, though, of course, neither system, in my view, is perfect, and it's quite easy to poke holes in both of them. I think really no matter what gearing system you go with, or whatever Blizzard goes with, there are naturally going to be flaws. There's going to be cases where that system doesn't work. There's going to be play styles where it just doesn't work out. Ultimately, it's about finding a solution that works the best for the most players without being too problematic for particular niche groups. I think an example of maybe a niche group that has been hurt a little bit is the Mythic raiding people, but I think it's fair to say that a lot of that can be to a degree self-inflicted by playing a playstyle that is just going to get you burnt out realistically. And that's most of what I think about how this stuff could go. I really do encourage you to leave your own ideas for World of Warcraft gearing, though, down in the comments below. I think that's what's really important. If you see someone else's idea, be sure to like it, because that will help the really good quality stuff to rise to the top, or maybe it'll just like help Cat Danny have this bizarre rise to power that he's currently experiencing. But anyway, let's talk about the actual news flash, because legendary item things have happened again, and I know that is something that you all particularly love to talk about. So they've been redesigning many of the legendary items in patch 7.2. I think this is good news, actually. Some of the non-throughput legendaries have had new throughput-based effects be added to them, and others are getting a boost to their stat budget. Blizzard's overall goal is basically to have it so the legendaries overall are more in line with each other. I'm very glad they've decided to just sort of ditch the divide in utility legendary versus throughput legendary. It's one of those things where maybe this isn't the way you would have done things from the start, but at this stage of the expansion, I think it's the best way to make the most people happy right now. They are also going to be bringing down the numbers of some of the existing, particularly powerful throughput legendaries in the hope of making them overall just a little bit more balanced across the board, which, that mightn't be great for some, but overall I think it's probably good for the game. Finally, the artifact relic upgrade is being ditched. So this was going to have relics have a second bonus trait that they would increase on your artifact weapon. There was a lot of uproar about the RNG worries here, so they've replaced it with an upgrade that gives you a higher chance of having world quests to drop double AP or something like that. It's completely boring as a replacement, but it does seem like a lot of players did take issue with that relic upgrade. Overall, it's not something that I was particularly excited about anyway, so I'm hardly going to mourn its loss. They are the two main new developments that I think will be quite welcome for much of the heroic and above rating community, something which I would love to rejoin this patch. We'll see how things go, but that does depend on if I'm able to wrangle some free time away from the WoW add-on project, which I should have more stuff to talk about towards the end of this month. But anyway, that's it for the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.